Sophie Turner may have been one of the stars of Sky Atlantic's hit show Game of Thrones, but the real queen of Sky Atlantic is Sophie Turner-Laing, one of the UK television industry's best known and most respected executives. With stints at Henson, Flextech, the BBC and Sky, Sophie's career has spanned every side of the UK and international TV business. And as befits the former CEO of Endemol Shine, the home of Big Brother, Sophie came to the diary room to share her thoughts on a range of topics. Enjoy. Hi Sophie, welcome to the pod.
Hey Danny, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. I think all of us in our working careers have thought to ourselves, some of the people we're working with are really a bunch of Muppets. But in your case, you literally did start working with a bunch of Muppets. So it would be fascinating to hear about how things kicked off for you in the world of TV, how you got into it, and what it was like working with those very furry creatures.
Well, I would definitely not call them a bunch of Muppets because they were the Muppets. And it was an amazingly fun time. I'd just come back from Australia where I'd been for about 2 years and needed a job. So I rang somebody up and they said, oh, yes, my friend is setting up the distribution side of Henson, as its formal name was. And so off I pootled up to Hampstead, where the Creature Workshop was in Downshire Hill and Jim Henson's house was on the other side. And Mark Grenside, who hired me, took me out to lunch. And that was my interview. And I had a very happy, brilliant 8 years working for Jim and all the absolute wonderful crazies there. And starting off at the bottom as a secretary in those days, we weren't assistants, working for the very legendary, very loud Peter Orton and Mark. And then after a year, I said, okay, I've had enough of looking after you guys. I want a proper job. So they started you off on the sales assistant role, which in those days you got to sell to all the smallest countries in the world. So if you screwed it up, it had absolutely no effect on the bottom line whatsoever. So, which was brilliant because the people in the Caribbean or Africa or wherever were all totally lovely and brilliant. And we only had the Muppet Show and Fraggle Rock to sell. So it didn't exactly involve all day. So at 4 o'clock every afternoon, we used to stop, have tea, and the sculptors from the Creature Workshop used to come over the road to Jim's house, which is where we were all based, and play word games. And then we go to the pub. So it was absolutely spectacular. And the thing that I'm absolutely love is that the people who I worked with them, I'm still enormously close to. And we had this camaraderie that was all of us very young, most of us under 30, making it up as we went along with the lovely Jim, who never fussed about anything and only wanted to know if you sold it to Ethiopia or somewhere like that. Never asked you about the P&L ever. So it was brilliant.
And then from there, it was Flextech, then the BBC. Is that right?
Well, before Flextech, actually, Peter and I set up HIT, as it was known, which took its name from Henson International Television. But HIT was our own company. Mainly because Jim, sadly, just before he died, was negotiating to sell the Muppets to Disney. And Peter and I decided, having pretty much done our own thing, because we had a huge amount of freedom, that we didn't really want to go and work for the mouse. However lovely Etienne de Villiers was at that time, neither of us could see ourselves as corporate creatures, and look at me after all my career. But there we go then. And so
can't imagine there would be much 4 o'clock tea in the...
no, definitely not. Definitely no alcohol, that's for sure. And so about 6 months after my first child, Alex, was born, we set up HIT. So we took the whole sales team out of Henson's and set up again on 26 episodes of Alvin and the Chipmunks and 13 episodes of Postman Pat. And we took a big jump off the cliff and had some fantastic shareholders in the shape of Roger Luard, who ran Flextech in those days, and Christopher Thompson from DC Thompson, and the legendary Mike Buckwell. And off we went. And we were based in central London, pretty much with the whole sales team that we've been with at Henson's, and off we went to the races and specialised in kind of high end, still in the kids business. So the kind of areas that we knew pretty well. And it was from there, because Roger was a shareholder of HIT, that I ended up going to Flextech. Because by that stage, I'd worked for Peter for 13 years. And there were some days of the week, even though I was the deputy MD, where I literally felt like his assistant. And I thought, time to go before I kill him. So I went to LA, set up the HIT offices there, came back, all with small children and all that kind of thing. So a very understanding husband in the shape of Carlo. And I rang Roger and literally said, I'm about to kill him. And he said, don't worry, darling, come and work for us. So off I crossed the bridge to the channel side of the business, working with the very fabulous Brent Harmon and Mark Lewis, and we all were based up in Camden. And it was the rock and roll days of channel TV kind of thing, where we literally made it up as we went along. And then my main job there, which was kind of under the radar, was setting up the UK TV deal, which was, we had to keep very, very confidential, because Sky were bidding for it on one side and we were on the other side. And obviously Flextech was the total jumped up newcomers. But the BBC decided, for whatever reason, to come with us. And so UK TV was born. And unfortunately, I was the one who first started the programme license agreement, which is a monster. But the BBC, obviously, it was the first time they'd been in commercial television in the UK. So it was a big education process. So I spent a lot of time with the BBC guys trying to explain to them how commercials were loaded into programs, and no, we didn't have the choice, and you couldn't ban certain types of product, and God knows what you needed to go for everything. And then the BBC called, and the very legendary Alan Howden, who actually died a couple of weeks ago or a month ago or something, very recently, had been the controller of programme acquisition, as it was called, ProgAc, for centuries. And June Drongul had been his number two, and she just left to go and head up Channel 4's programme acquisition. So there was a vacancy as a number two slot. And so I headed off to the BBC. I got interviewed actually by Alan Yentob and Peter Salmon, who were great fun and lovely. And halfway through the interview, they said, okay, Sophie, now we need to ask you some questions, because I hadn't thought I would get the job in a million years. So I was just rattling away as normal. And then I moved over to Wood Lane, into possibly the ugliest office building I think I've ever been in. And in fact, it is now called, rebranded, the Ugly Building. And the whole team there at Programme Acquisitions, under Alan's tutelage, literally knew every single movie that had ever been produced. I knew the TV programme side, the series side, pretty well, doing the buying for Flextech and things like that, and loving American shows. But the film side, it just opened up this kind of huge, great world. But you didn't dare ever raise your hand, because you knew perfectly well there was 18 people in the room who knew it better than you did. But I had a great time at the BBC, because I was there for about 1 year of John Burt, and then Greg arrived, Greg Dyke, who put an energy into the BBC like nothing on earth. I think the BBC still were reeling from his arrival when he issued us with yellow cards which said cut the crap, because he was absolutely determined to try and scythe his way through the kind of labyrinth like admin side of the BBC, which I think is still there in some shape or form. So while I was there doing the programme acquisitions, Alan then retired and I took over. When Greg was short of a director of various divisions, I used to step in as a kind of acting up role. So my nickname at the BBC was Super Temp.
I thought more was the Red Adair of the BBC, because it was acquisitions, but also business affairs and marketing, and then acting director of television at one point as well.
Yes, that was enormous fun. Apart from, I'd had a bet with the then head of BBC News, who was called Richard Sambrook, that the Queen Mother wouldn't die on my watch, because Jaina Bennett was coming in. So I didn't have very long to wait. And literally Easter the Easter weekend it happened. And the BBC ring you up and they go, I'm very sorry to have to tell, as if it's your own member of family. And I thought it was somebody taking the piss. And I said, oh, don't be ridiculous, and several more expletives after that. But it was true. And I was in the middle of Hampshire, and those days we didn't have iPads or laptops or anything like that. So I had to send Carlo off to go and buy the Radio Times. I had to find the head scheduler for the BBC One, who was on a walking tour in Yorkshire, and make him sit on the top of the hill because he lost signal every time he went into the valley. And then we had to plan where all the schedules moved to and things like that. And it was an unbelievable experience. But the BBC are fantastic at those kind of things. And they'd had a few years to practice, although their standby programs left a lot to be desired. We had to remove copulating lions. I went, I don't think this is really appropriate for standby programming. So anyway, we had a brilliant time. And I felt very lucky to have been there when there was a lot of energy, and the buying of non-UK programs was very much loved, not looked down on.
And so I suppose a lot of people would have got the feeling, maybe even yourself, that you were being groomed for, some very senior things at the BBC, but you left.
Yes.
What was the allure, other than the obvious, of going to work at Sky? But there must have been more than just the sort of the pecuniary side of things.
Well, yes, because I'm much more about what the job is first. Obviously, it helps to pay the bills if you get paid well, but it's not the be all and end all of life. I think what I really understood after 5 years, and I worked with some truly wonderful people there, that I was not a public service broadcaster through and through. I still, I'd grown up on the commercial side, and I liked the ability to be very black and white about life. The kind of challenge of the BBC is that there's a lot of grey that goes around it. Whether is it good for, or does it hurt the audience? Does the audience like it? Does the government not like it? There's so many vested stakeholders. It's very hard to have a very clear path, where, as you know very well from your days in Sony, either it works or it doesn't work in a commercial situation, and you'll run on trying to generate a profit, which puts having no profit to generate, it has a different impetus to life. And also, have you tried resisting Dawn Airy when she's saying, you must come, you must come, you must come? You try doing that.
Sure, I wouldn't want to try that. It's funny, I'm trying to get her on the show. So at the shoes on the other foot at the moment. Let's see how you can resist me. I suspect she can. So that was exciting, because probably on a lot of levels, because it was now Sky Movies and that whole process, but also you ended up kind of reshaping the channel lineup, and this is when Sky Atlantic came about, and that must have been an interesting process to be able to say, we just want to approach things completely differently.
Yeah, so I had the fun, though, of being there with Dawn for a couple of years before she disappeared off, and running Sky Movies and being her deputy was never a dull day. The first job of running Sky Movies was to get in and renegotiate all the simply appalling contracts that had been done with all the movie studios, which were terrible, Danny.
We had some fun.
And then when Dawn left, James Murdoch was then he was then the CEO and my boss. And in that inimitable way, they look around a bit and then give the incumbent the job, which can be quite irritating. And then I thought, well, now just prove him that I'm the right person for the job. Although they didn't give me the whole bit of Dawn's Empire. So I had a battle for a bit over a year or so to get that. But because the bit that I loved that eventually came to me was Sky News. John Riley, who's the head of Sky News, is a genius and the most intelligent, charming person you've ever met. But being involved with that news organization is one of my absolute high points of being at Sky. And Dawn had started in a kind of hands tied behind her back type way to start introducing original production onto Sky. But of course, every time they looked at a drama budget, there was always something else, somebody else's marketing budget that needed the money for. So it was a very, very hard job. And eventually I went to James and I said, look, if we're ever going to make a difference here as far as a channel brand, and, you know, as much as I loved American shows, we need to do something to connect with our British audience. You've got to do something meaningful, and just one drip at a time is never going to change anything. And eventually we kind of got them there on drama by deliberately going after a kind of book-based drama strategy, so that the titles were already familiar with people. So it wasn't kind of original new ideas, but, you know, the Terry Pratchett's still are some of Sky's most highest rated shows and things like that. I knew the HBO guys extremely well because at the BBC, actually, we'd co-produced Band of Brothers, which is still one of my most favourite shows ever. So I knew the guys very well, and Charles Schrager, who you know, and I were sitting chewing the cud, and I said, wouldn't it be a great idea if we just launched an HBO Sky channel? And the reality of it is that they were very protective, rightly, of the HBO brand and didn't want it sitting alongside non-HBO shows, but actually they didn't produce enough shows to run a whole channel. So we started off this project, and by that time Jeremy Darroch was the CEO, and he was brilliant because I really didn't have the most figured out business plan. You'd never get away with it now. But I said, I know there's a gap in the market. These are the great shows. Put them all in one place. It'll be exclusive to us. And it was, I guess, in the days before binging and streaming and all that kind of bit. But you could tell there was a kind of heartbeat move there as you saw more talent, both behind and in front of the camera, move from film into television, which, as you know, when we all started, TV was the lowest of the low then. But you could see all this talent moving there. So you knew that great things were going to come. So I had a poster sitting on the floor of my office for Pacific, which was actually the second series on from Band of Brothers. So I looked at it and I thought, okay, I need a code name for this project so it doesn't get out. So I said, okay, we're going to call it Sky Atlantic, because the Atlantic connects us in Isleworth over to New York. And that's how the channel name was born. And when they put it out to research, it tested the best. And I feel very, very proud, actually. I mean, there was obviously a huge amount of people there who all kind of lent big hands in helping it happen. Even Stuart Murphy, who originally said, no, it's never going to work. And then I convinced him it was going to work. So off we went, and the rest is history.
You mentioned the movie side of things. Did that give you a different perspective on the studios, because you were dealing with, rather than the sort of ad hoc movie packages, you're talking about these big multi-year deals. In some cases, it's a different team within the studio that you're having to deal with. Was that a real eye-opener?
I think the legendary output deals that existed were great because they gave a movie channel a kind of constant supply of programs. But there was a lot of abuse that went on in the process of opening on one screen in LA just to be paid a fortune from the Sky deal, which was still, and I think still is, one of the richer deals out there in the world. So I think gradually we got to a pretty good place with everybody, because we rarely didn't renew. It was always a good kind of test of willpower and courage and you name it, to get them to the end. But usually we got them to the end, and then everybody could have a rest for 3 years or so, and then we'd start it all again. But what, obviously, the studios, particularly those who had both mainstream output but also had speciality output, was always the kind of more interesting, because you've got the whole mixture of things. You didn't necessarily want to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds for something that had generated 2p in the box office, however marvelous it was compared to Men in Black. But, you know, that was always the constant and gave us something to talk about for years, Danny. So anyway, I think it was good, because I think for a while Sky was looked on just really as a cash cow to just shove it there and generate it back again. But over time, we got lots of support add on behind the scenes programming and things that gave the movies much more context, which I think is important for audience. That took a bit of a while to get the studios to there because they'd made all the stuff anyway. They just hadn't thought of putting it out on the kind of international TV circuit.
Did Sky change over that period of time? And did your influence and others help it to change? Because it had a very sort of macho reputation in its early days. But then, like sort of yourself and Dawn and others, Sarah Wright coming in, did that start to change a little bit, the culture?
Yes, I think really as soon as probably Tony Ball went, and then James came in, and then Jeremy, there were just different heads there. There were certainly more senior women, and sport, as you can expect, dominated Sky. So that was all boys, a few girls, but mainly boys. And that was led by the very legendary Vic Wakeling, who was an absolute genius. So they literally had the power. And I understood that because, football, as you know, dominates most people's lives. So it was quite important, I think, to drive a culture that was more not as aggressive. They totally believed that everything had to be a fight. I remember Tony Ball telling me the first time I went to meet him, because Dawn, of course, had hired me before I think she told him. And he said, Sophie, you've got to understand, we're like Millwall. Everybody hates us and we hate them. And I looked at him and I went, isn't that a bit prehistoric these days? Anyway, I think in the early days, trying to even get production companies to come and pitch to us was really hard work. Somehow that road to Isleworth could have been a road to Timbuktu. It took people. And then they'd arrive and present you something that still had Channel 4 written on the bottom of the page kind of thing. So I was always very loyal to the guys who came to us in the early days and gave us the benefit of the doubt that we really were going to try to make this work. But, when Dawn and I first arrived, I think on the first day, we were standing out in the car park looking up at this poster of a satellite dish shadowed against the moon. And I said, where the have we come? This is about content. What about the technology? And trying to get that balance of content and technology were actually a great marriage was kind of won out in the end.
You say that Sky was quite male dominated and had that sport influence, but the industry when you were starting out was quite male dominated. As you said, you started as a secretary, not an assistant. Did you find that being a woman in the industry was was it harder to succeed? And do you think that the fact that you have been very successful actually provides a great role model for female executives now coming through? Do you see a change that you witnessed and you were in fact part of?
Yes, I think probably I just came in as a lot of, because the great thing about TV is that you didn't have to have a first from Oxford to get into the business. You literally could start off at the bottom, whether you came in by the assistant route or as a runner into production or whatever. And so the next generation's probably just, 5-10 years above me had actually just transforming into salespeople. So they'd stopped making the coffee and were selling the shows. And so there was not hundreds, but there was a good group there. And you look at international sales now, and I think there's probably more women than there are men in it. I think every job I've tried to do is to say, look, anybody can do this. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. You just have to want it enough, be brave enough, and be energetic enough, kind of thing. But it shouldn't matter, male or female. Anybody could do it. But I think it's probably gives people a lot of confidence to see that you can get there, and to see maybe role models or people like Dawn and I and various others Carolyn McCall, who've worked their way through the ranks kind of thing and got there. And then it's there for the taking, and you just have to push that door open hard.
So you did your stint at Sky, and then you thought, oh, I'll just take it easy for a bit. This is all supposition, but it's from what I can tell. And then suddenly you weren't just taking it easy. You'd moved to Endemol Shine. What was the brief? What enticed you back, and what were they asking you to do with that business?
No, you're absolutely right. Because I left Sky with no job to go to, and in fact was planning on producing drama with one of my old colleagues, Duncan Kenworthy, from who'd worked with at Henson's. So we'd been talking about various projects, and I told Carlo, no more corporate life. I'll do my own thing, kind of thing, as and when. And then stupidly, I guess, but on the other hand, an amazing experience. James Murdoch called, and it's very hard to say no to a lot of people. And then the worst thing, I think there is a slightly female tendency to think, oh, I can fix that. And so the challenge of bringing two very separate companies together in Endemol and Shine, I thought, okay, I love jigsaw puzzles. I thought I can do this. And also, what I'd loved from Henson was being in the international marketplace. And I had missed that, being the UK broadcasting side kind of thing, which you are limited to your territory and that's it. So the thought of going back out there with all the people that I had grown up with 300 years ago was really good fun. Didn't realise how quite hard work it was going to be. I should have thought about that. And also, I was a new CEO. And I do quite a lot of mentoring still, and I do various stints for people of things I wish people had told me when I became a CEO to do or not to do. I had two very diverse shareholders in the shape of 21st Century Fox and then Apollo, who are the New York private equity guys. So one long-term thinking, the other short-term thinking. So having two sets of different shareholders was a challenge in itself, let alone trying to unite 4,000 people in 30 countries as it was then. Nothing like a challenge to finish your career on.
There's a sense that there'll be more consolidation, and we're seeing consolidation in all sorts of sides of the business. But on the production side, I guess it's about economies of scale, and that produces some short-term benefits. But are there longer-term benefits to having these big production companies? Does it produce more creativity? Does it give you more influence with commissioners to get your programs made? What are the tangible benefits, do you think, of these bigger production entities?
I think, like most businesses, you either need to be at scale or you need to be a small boutique. The kind of mid-range is just the death of everybody. So the fact that both Endemol and Shine had already been conglomerates of kind of collecting up different production companies. And the thing to remember, which I say often, is don't forget, that's just the umbrella. Underneath, just in the UK alone, Endemol Shine has 22 different production companies. They all do their own thing. They all compete against each other and whatever. And I think one of the benefits of scale is having this constant pipeline of ideas from all over the world, from Israel to Australia to Brazil to you name it. And we work very hard to try and get this kind of collaboration between everybody, because creators don't naturally want to share. But if they knew what was bubbling away in the other parts of the world, they could say, okay, this maybe could work for us or whatever it is. Because what you want to do is give them as many new ideas as possible to sell. Because at the end of the day, that's what you are: sellers first, producers second. And the UK is still amazingly vibrant as far as creativity and ideas. And for me, it was very interesting because I knew the scripted side pretty well, the non-scripted side not as well. And then inheriting a company that had both Big Brother and MasterChef in it, which are like the big daddies of non-scripted, was absolutely fascinating. And, we did some really great things. And I love being back in the world of reading scripts and, talking to people on the other side of the world. Not so much getting on an aeroplane every week to go to Amsterdam, but the Dutch team were lovely, but being headquartered there had its commuting challenges.
And you've always managed to weave your sort of charity and fundraising activities in around what you do from an executive point of view. Has that been incredibly rewarding, both personally and professionally, to be involved in that side of things?
Yes, I think it's very important, and particularly in an industry that has a lot of young going through it. You have to run companies, be part of a company that you feel has a soul. You know, one of the great things we set up at Endemol Shine was Endemol Shine Pride, because being based in so many countries, some of our countries was still criminal to be gay. And I wanted to provide a community, a global community that people could just tap into if they wanted, wherever they lived in the world. So that was fantastic. And people, people are genuinely driven and passionate about wanting to help.
So what does the future hold? What are you genuinely now going to take it easy, or will somebody knock on your door?
I'm definitely not doing another corporate job ever. And it's coming up actually nearly a year since I left Endemol Shine. And I have to say, I've loved every minute. And a bit like you, I'm doing projects that interest me with people that I like, that may consume me for a month or maybe one day a month. It just depends what it is. I'm doing this. I'm on this advisory board for the government on looking at the future of public service television. So that's keeping the grey cells a bit activated. Variety is often the spice of life.
Yeah, very much so. Well, I know that you were at Wondery, so maybe you could start a podcast.
Funnily enough, I loved being at Wondery, actually. And sadly, for me, Amazon came very quickly to the door, because I would have definitely have loved to have done another year or two there, because Hanan had set up the most fantastic company. Reminded me a lot of Hit in its early days, actually.
Well, this is the part of the podcast where I ask my guests for their lockdown book, film, record, and box set. What would keep you company?
So I had a good think, and I was really curious listening to other people's recommendations, because you kind of get a feel for somebody's taste and also their curiosity. Film, I'll start with film because that's closest to my heart, I guess, now. So lockdown and BAFTA voting were the most brilliant pairing, because never before did I absolutely have the time to watch everything. And I vote in both foreign language and animation. So being able to watch absolutely everything was amazing. And I think I thought I'd pick a new film because it resonated. And I don't know whether that was the lockdown, the film, the combination, maybe just everything, was Nomadland. The cinematography on it is just spectacular. And I love that whole look at a community that I knew nothing about. And also Frances McDormand is a force of nature. And then box set, because literally I was watching 3 films a day, I actually did not watch much television. So I was particularly delighted for Sky Atlantic to have Kate Winslet's new Mayor of Easttown, which I absolutely loved and thought she was tremendous in it. And Americans who know say her accent is absolutely spot on, and it is a very difficult, but I thought it was gripping, beautifully filmed, everything. And then belatedly, I've started, because being in France, I thought I should watch something French. So Call My Agent and The Bureau are up there on the box set lists. Book, one of the great things of lockdown was having the time. So I hived off all these enormous books that I've had sitting by my bed for a very long time. But the one that resonated the most, and I can't wait to see because it's about to go on stage, was Hilary Mantel's The Mirror and the Light, which was the 3rd in the Wolf Hall series, which, comes literally as 5 phone books together kind of thing, if you're old enough to remember what a phone book looked like. And so that literally, the fact that you could joyfully sit there, and because I wasn't working, flat out, and just lose yourself in her amazing writing was a real treat. And then record. So record seems a kind of odd word to say these days. And actually I found, mainly because of working with Wondery, is I tried to listen to as many podcasts as possible. So that took away probably from one's music listening, because I was kind of busy trying to keep up with their very, very large output. And so the thing that I loved very recently actually was Glastonbury Live, where the thought, that they had all these amazing people in the field in Somerset in the pouring rain. But there were a couple of artists there, one an old one who I absolutely love, which is Michael Kiwanuka. But the new singer that I hadn't heard before, and who, needless to say, has been around for ages, I just hadn't clocked her, was Georgia Smith, who I thought has the dreamiest voice ever.
Very good. Some interesting choices there, which is great. That's what we like. Well, Sophie Turner-Laing OBE, thank you so much for being on the pod, and we'll look forward to you mysteriously and suddenly joining some massive corporate operation because either Dawn or James knocks on your door and you can't say no.
Thank you very much, Danny. Take care.